supported curricular and pedagogical reform to make science interesting, engaging, and relevant to improve students' experiences. And I would encourage you to check her full bio out on the website. And then tonight, I'm also delighted to introduce our co-facilitator, Dr. Michael Antonio Mendoza, who is a dentist by profession, and his research interests are in dental public health and health policy. He's active doing consultancy work with different government agencies and developmental partners in the Philippines, and is currently a faculty member of the Department of Community Dentistry, which I love that title, by the way, of the College of Dentistry at the University of the Philippines, Manila. So thank you so much again for joining everyone, and thank you so much to our two facilitators for this evening.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for that lovely introduction. I'm so glad that all of you are here this evening. My colleague Annie Zeidman-Karpinski is here helping also with technical things in the background. So our goals for this evening or this morning, depending on where we are in the world, the goal of this whole webinar series is to provide pedagogical, technological, and peer support to faculty across the APRU network and beyond. And then in this particular session, we're trying to look at how we can create equitable and remote learning environments, as Melissa mentioned. The format of this session, I see some names that I've noticed before, so some of you are familiar with the session format and some of you are new. We'll have 20 to 30 minutes where Michael and I will share some experience, both from research and then our own teaching experiences or from our universities. We'll have approximately 30 minutes for small group discussion, and then we'll have approximately 30 minutes to come back together for a large group discussion. In the chat, I would like to invite each of you to share with us, how do you define equity? And in your definition, you might want to include some examples from your teaching, or you might want to include a definition. While we're doing that, I'm going to take care of a housekeeping thing. I'm going to stop sharing. Annie, I'm going to make you the host, and then I'll reshare. Okay, but in the chat, if you could please share, how do you define equity? We're starting to get some answers. All right, I'm starting to see some answers populate as I take care of my housekeeping thing here. All right, so a couple of answers about how people define equity. We have equal access, when all students are given the tools they need to succeed. Equal chances, being fair and impartial, making sure the marginalized sector has access to goods. Equity is not the gap between the high and the low, but how far behind the lowest lag from the mainstream. So equity is making sure no one is left behind. These are great answers. I'm going to scroll to the bottom. Equity for me is about providing the necessary support in order for each student to have equal opportunities, learning for all. And then one more, when both students and faculty are given resources they need for effective learning. Great. So there's lots of elements and dimensions that have been answered in those questions. And this one seemingly simple question. We're going to look at what some of the research says about equity and inclusion and how we can create equitable and inclusive learning environments for our students. And then Michael's going to share some examples from the University of Philippines, Manila, over the last 9 months. Those of you who've been at a workshop with me before have seen this diagram. This has been in a lot of places since March. This is from a 1999 study looking at how do we create online learning experiences that work well for students. And there's three key elements here: a social presence, students and faculty seeing each other as real people; a cognitive presence, where students get to engage with the course content, not just when they're in class, but outside of class as well; and then a teaching presence, how we as the instructors design the educational experience. Just on Tuesday this week, so on December 1st, this paper was published. And as I was starting to think about what I was going to talk about for this week, then I read this paper titled "A Pandemic Crash Course, Learning to Teach Equitably in Synchronous," so at the same time, online classes. The authors of this study had already been engaged in a faculty learning community where they had a team of faculty who were going through this circular process here, where the faculty were teaching. They were then part of a classroom observation where someone came in and observed them teach. The observations were recorded and the interactions, looking for equity specifically, who's interacting, who's not in a classroom. They used a tool called Equip to encode the data. They looked at some analysis. They shared those data back at the faculty learning community, and then faculty had an opportunity to practice their revisions. This was going on real time in the spring semester. And so the faculty had observations before the pandemic and after the pandemic. And it almost divided evenly, where they had 7 observations, 7 weeks, and multiple observations before the pandemic, and teaching was happening in person, and then 9 weeks of observations in the remote teaching environment. So what I wanted to show here were a couple of the figures from this paper. This first one is looking at whole class participation. The blue is how many students were participating, or the number of individual interactions students were having in person. The very last example in person. This is after faculty had some feedback. And then the orange is how many student interactions there were then when they moved online. And what I hope you see here is a pretty dramatic drop, that these faculty experienced that as they moved from in person where students were engaging, that then when they moved online, for most of the faculty, there was a pretty significant drop in student engagement. You can see that especially in the right-hand column here in the total engagement across all of them. So the second figure from this particular study is, remember, this was an iterative process and faculty were having multiple observations, is that for each of these faculty, so round 3, round 4, and round 5, it correlates with when the faculty were in the term. So these were all remote observations. And what I hope you see is that the blue here, there's very little chat. This was looking at students using the chat and engaging in that as kind of a real part of the class conversation, not just a back channel conversation, is that very few students were engaging in the chat the first time the observations happened online, but that as the term went on, the semester went on, there was more and more engagement by students using the chat, not across the board, but when they combined it all together, they really saw this increase in chat. And the faculty talked about this as it felt like a mechanism for students who were not comfortable or unable to show their video and participate in person, but they could still participate. So the authors of this study looked at what happened in their class, and they actually came up with these 7 lessons that they learned as they moved online, which I think are valuable for us to consider as we continue to think about teaching remotely. The first is that faculty had to spend time reestablishing the norms. Students, if you have a class where you want students to talk, how do students know that that is something that they're still going to be asked to do, even in a remote environment when they're not sitting next to a classmate? They found that using students' names increased the environment where students were willing to participate. They used breakout rooms, which we'll use here. They used the chat-based discussion so that was constantly part of the conversation. They used polling software which we're not using this evening, but occasionally we use in these sessions. And then they talked about how they created an inclusive environment. And lastly, they reduced the content to maintain the rigor so that the content students were learning was at the level that they wanted the students to learn. But this number 6 here about creating an inclusive environment, I think is a little bit sticky. And so I want to spend just a little bit more time exploring something else that came across my desk or my computer this week. So that I attended a webinar with my colleague Glenn Davenport, who's at the Yale Center for Teaching and Learning as part of the National Institute on Scientific Teaching. And for the past 4 years, Glenn has been part of a study looking at how workshop participants describe inclusive teaching practices. So asking the people who are actually in the classrooms, how do you define inclusive teaching? Much like I asked you at the beginning, how do you define equity? And there were 7 coding structures that they came up with when they looked at structures. There were 7, I'm sorry, when they looked at answers, there were 7 categories. The first is being aware and having a welcoming voice and student feelings. So what this means in practicality is being aware. Students know about the instructors, they learn about the students, they ask them where they are, what's going on in their lives, and that faculty have a sense that their students might be struggling and talk about that. That faculty use a welcoming voice to encourage students to learn more, to engage in the material, and that they actively avoid excluding students with the language that they use. And the last one on the left-hand side is about student-centered, and they assess the experience of the students. 4 more that they found about inclusive teaching include the structure. Is there active learning? Is there group work? The type of content, are students being represented? So in the United States, we talk a lot about, are we just showing old white men scientists, or are we showing the diverse representation of scientists who are practicing in all fields of science? Is the content relevant to students? And then the last 2 about accessibility. Can students see the material? I just learned how to turn closed captioning on my slides. That's another form of accessibility. And then are faculty taking into account differential preparation that students might have coming into the classroom? So when we look at this, what they found is that there were at least 100 different practices that faculty said that they use to increase inclusivity in their classroom. So there's a lot of commonality. Those 7 categories that I just showed have a lot of commonality, but the way that each of us, the way that I think about what I'm doing, and the way that Melissa does something, and the way that Michael does something, and the way that Iris does something in their classroom might look different, but we're all working towards how do we create a more inclusive and a more equitable environment. I'm going to put this list up here. We're not going to go through these. I'll be happy to talk about any of these that pique your interest that you'd like to know about later. But this is just a little bit of what the research shows, that there are practices that we can do that increase the equity in our classrooms, whether we're in person or online, and that each of us might define that a little bit differently, which makes these conversations a little bit challenging. So I'm now going to turn the conversation over to Michael, who's going to describe some of how his university has approached this really difficult conversation of equity and access since March. Just let me know when you want to go to the next slide and I'll touch it.
Right. Thank you, Ellie. Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody. So we hope you are well. As you noticed from Ellie's big initial slides, that we always have to ask for how everybody's doing whenever we are conducting online classes, synchronous classes, because everybody's having a hard time. Okay, Ellie mentioned a lot of instances or techniques on how to observe equity in access during remote teaching. as a faculty member and directly to the students. I'll be discussing some of the mechanisms and the experiences of my university, University of the Philippines, as an institution on how this was delivered. Okay, so Ellie mentioned about different strategies on how to uh, improve the sense of community and the sense of belongingness of the students, even if everybody was virtual. But then, how could you participate in that if you do not have access to the gadgets, if you don't have access to the to internet? And it's a big problem for the Philippines as a developing country. So the university has been adjusting to that. Next slide, please. So I think everybody is having has been experiencing how the pandemic works now. Okay, so for the Philippines, we're on our almost on our ninth month of lockdown. It's said to be one of the longest in the world. In a webinar of one of my colleagues this week, he was saying if a child was conceived at the start of the lockdown, the baby is about to be delivered in the next few days. Okay, so we've been locked up for so long. Okay, so these were the data that I collected from the government agencies 2 days ago. So we are still we're the number of cases is still there. I'm still not comfortable going out. I'm sure some of the students are not also because everybody's reasonably cautious. Okay, next slide, please. So the immediate impact of COVID there was a rapid shift to asynchronous learning. So when classes were suspended at the beginning of March, that week the instruction was okay, shift everything asynchronously. Okay, but not everybody was prepared. Everybody was taken by surprise with that. Even the experts that we have would not have the capacity to do that immediately, and it caused increased anxiety for students and also the faculty. Okay, so by the middle of March of this year, the university came out with the policy uh, that also suspended asynchronous learning for because we are looking at the survival at its basic. So why with lockdown, limited movements, we felt the university felt that the students should not be encumbered with academic activities at that moment because what is important is for you to survive with your family and survive. Period. Okay, so that by mid March, uh, the asynchronous learning was suspended also, and then there was the semester was ended early by April 30. So there were mechanisms of a no fail grade policy. So there were grades were given as deferred, and they would have 1 year to complete that. If they were not able to complete that, then they would be dropped, and it would not be so bad for the students. Okay, so the rationale of that was we need to be compassionate enough because not everybody is going through this the same way. So in issues of equity, even though if you are at home, not everybody calls their house a home. Not everybody would have the same space, they have the same privacy you would want for it to be conducive to learning. So that was what the university saw as a solution to this problem that taken us by surprise immediately. Next slide, please. Okay. So as an introduction, the University of the Philippines, I am proud to be part of. I would like to say no disrespect to the other colleagues here from the Philippines, but we have one of the best groups of students applying to the university. We have them, and proud to have to call them the scholars of the state. So we have the student body comes from different social strata. So the call for equity and access to education is espoused in the university through academic freedom and through easier access to education. So this is symbolized by the oblation. If you could see a picture of an outstretched man, it's a sculpture of a man outstretched with outstretched arms, looking up to the heavens, offering themselves for service to the community. So that's what the university stands for. So so we should be conscious of how we provide equity and we will provide access to education despite this times. Next, please. So in the Philippines, it the a main problem for remote learning is the internet connection. Okay, I may need to apologize in advance. You might some you, later on I might have unstable connection, and I think it's a problem across the globe. Even for some areas that would have a strong connection, there were moments that it could be unstable. But in the Philippines, it's either unstable, it is either slow, or it's not present at all. So imagine for far-flung island municipalities, for example, they may not even have stable electricity to access synchronous learning. Okay, so aside from that, even if you have that connection, not everybody would have the appropriate gadgets to access technology. They may not have good working smartphones. That could be the minimum. They might not have updated software for their computers if they have computers at all. Okay, next please. Okay, so what the university did was favor asynchronous sessions over synchronous sessions. Okay. Ellie mentioned different strategies to build a sense of community during synchronous sessions. But maybe for our context in the Philippines, sometimes it's a bit difficult to do that because they might not even have connection to start with to participate in synchronous sessions. Okay. I don't know if it was a conscious effort for Ellie earlier not to use Mentimeter, but personally, I prefer not using Mentimeter because it would mean, sometimes it would mean a second gadget for the student to use to participate in that when one gadget sometimes is not available. So for the university, the policies were favoring asynchronous. So those who may not have connection would not be left behind. If synchronous sessions are done, it is recommended to be recorded, and then these recordings would be made available to the students who are not able to come in at their own convenience. Okay. At the bo- I think at the core of this also is to have the flexibility of deadlines. I use the term target date to complete in my syllabus because I understand some students may not have the luxury of time. Time is relative now. Time could be very long for some, it could be very short for some. Okay. So for those clamoring for a long weekend for the past few years, now we have 9 months of a technical weekend because we've been staying home for that long. So for the flexibility of deadlines, so we allow the students to submit when they can. But of course, we guide them to pace them so otherwise they would still be left behind. Okay, so for when looking at asynchronous and synchronous sessions, it would mean you should have an internet connection. For the flexibility of deadlines, it means you would have gadgets to do your requirements through technological implements. What if you don't have both? That's when the university recommended the preparation of course packs. We had a colleague from the first session last month mentioning about course packs. So this is a compilation of the syllabi, the readings, different study guides and assignment guides that are printed or thumb drive that is sent to a student who may not have access, regular, stable access to internet or gadgets. So they could do and learn on their own pace and then maybe submit towards the end of the semester. So it was really difficult for the faculty preparing that at so short a time. So, but then the bottom line is how to deliver education to the students even at this point in time. Okay, next, please. Okay. So, given those policies, a minimum requirement would still be some kind of technological gadgets. So the university expanded its support to students to include learning assistance. So they may be given stipend internet connection. They may be given diff, laptops, gadgets, or phones at a minimum, so they could use to participate in the sessions. Okay, so from a social, we take pride that the University of the Philippines uh, uh, is looking at the social status of the students and then expanding the support to those who cannot afford it. So as mentioned in the chat box earlier, no one will be left behind. Okay, next please. So aside from that institutional support, there was also a program called the Kaagapay sa Pag-aaral. It means you have somebody to share the burden with while you are studying side by side. That's Kaagapay. So this way, the different constituents of the university, the alumni, the civil society could support students. Uh, the University of the Philippines systems has about 60,000 total students in the entire system. It is estimated about 5,600 of the students may not have access to technology. So from these programs, donors would give in their support to provide technological gadgets to our students. Okay. Maybe I'm posting this also for everybody so you'll know. So, and maybe out of the goodness of your heart, maybe at the website also. And we will thank you in advance for that, please. Again, also have to mention that part of the support there is uh, the 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 participation of the alumni groups. So for example, for the College of Dentistry, the UP Dental Alumni Association very much supportive of the students, even providing um, equipment that they could set up at their homes. So it's really a major obstacle because we are a skills based curricula. Next, please. Thank you, Ellie. Okay. So since everybody was taken aback with remote learning, we didn't realize the effects of Zoom fatigue. We've never done that before. So now we know to take a rest every few minutes. But then every day of online learning with the study guides, because it's more self-directed, sometimes the schoolwork piles up and then the students would have a hard time catching up. So this was realized by the university and implemented a reading break in the middle of the semester. So it meant it for the students, it's either you try to catch up with requirements without nothing adding up for that week, or if you want to rest, go rest. But the main policy there was there were no synchronous or asynchronous sessions, no deadlines for that week. So for the student could have that option to either relax or catch up. So it was a break. Okay. As I was telling my colleagues, I also need a break. Everybody needs a break. When the students have a break, I also take a break. So we should also try to do that. Have some pocket breaks every time. Okay, next please. Okay. So as if it's we are not having these problems for this year, the last month the Philippines was visited by very destructive typhoons, one after the other, in a span of 3 weeks. Okay. So even though all the adjustments were made, remote learning, the reading break, we we had to stop. We were forced to stop. So I think I apologize to Melissa and Ellie before that I was speaking for a lot of my colleagues then that for the last session, maybe you would not see a lot of us from the Philippines because we were dealing with power outages, we were dealing with floods, we were dealing with a lot of stuff at that time. So again, this compounded to the problems on and access to learning by the students. Okay, next please. So, so what the university did was to have a recovery break. Again, uh, after all those destructive typhoons, we had another week to recover. So again, since continue, definitely some students will be left behind from for their requirements because they won't have access. Even if they are well physically, they could not participate in the courses because they still don't have electricity. There are still some areas in the Philippines that where electricity has not been restored weeks after that typhoon. Okay. So requirements were suspended at that time. And also to support because everybody to help out. Students were also given the time if they want to organize relief efforts uh, and organize other activities to help alleviate the situation. Okay. And this is a new development just last week. Okay. For this semester, given that I don't know, we have different terms for that, maybe on our different contexts. We could say that this semester is a transition semester toward the use of remote learning, or this is the star. This is a semester. Okay, but we the university recognized the difficulties of shifting to remote learning for the semester. So a policy came out that on the grading system there will be no failing grades this semester. The students will be given the flexibility to complete their requirements uh, until the end after 1 year, and then the submission of grades is also extended to allow the students to catch up with the work. Okay, so it is a bit taxing. Saying it's a bit taxing is an understatement for the faculty because it means continuous redesigning of the courses and making sure that the core competencies and the learning outcomes are still maintained in the courses that are being offered. So for the past semester, that's what the university has been doing. The university has been looking uh, at the difficulties of the student and the faculty and trying to adjust to be able to make sure nobody is left behind. Okay, next please. And to end that, the bottom line there is in terms of remote learning, we just need to be creative in redesigning the courses to allow nobody is left behind. we need to be flexible, especially on the requirements, on the deadlines, and over those two, we need to be compassionate enough to understand that not everybody is going through this the same way as we are. Okay, I think that would end my lecture. Thank you.
Michael, thank you so much for sharing so many details about your experience. What I have found over the last 4 sessions is that we've heard from a lot of your colleagues about the challenges. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us both the details of what that's looked like from your perspective and then how the university has responded. So thank you. We are now going to move into breakout rooms. And when you go into your breakout room, I'm going to ask that you do quick introductions around the room with your name and your institution, your discipline, and then share something fun that you've done recently, whether it's a podcast, movie, TV show, or book. Maybe there's something else that you've done fun for entertainment. In your group, select somebody who's going to report back, select a recorder who's going to type, a timekeeper, and a discussion leader who's somebody who's going to just make sure the conversation keeps moving. There is a Google Doc for you to record your answers to each of these 3 prompts. So what challenges have you faced in creating an equitable and inclusive remote learning environment? We've presented some possible solutions from the research and from our experience. Which of these have you tried or would you like to try? And then what other suggestions do you have? Annie just put these questions and the prompts into the chat along with the Google Doc. So you should all be able to access that Google Doc. And it's 40 minutes after the hour, is that right? So let's still spend 30 minutes in breakout rooms so that you have some time to really get into these deep conversations and come up with some solutions. I think Annie's going to move me around so that I can come and visit all of the breakout rooms, at least for a couple of minutes. We have about 15 minutes left in our time together, and it would be great to hear some report out from a group. Is there a group who shared some challenges? One group who'd like to share some of the challenges that you've experienced?
Can I share?
Please do.
Okay, so some of our challenges, one of us is from Ecuador and the rest of us are from the Philippines. And we share that actually, because of the pandemic, some of our students are, for example, in the provinces, and they would have difficulty getting internet connections at times. So they will resort to using mobile data actually during recitations. And well, those are some of our challenges. So actually we have, I'm sharing from the University of Santo Tomas. Actually, we've had our online hybrid courses since 2004. We've had our faculty development programs as an integrated thing across all, from junior high school up to graduate school. So with that, we were able to actually bridge the gap between the younger colleagues and students. However, we have some difficulty still with the internet connection. So that's our main problem, especially with the typhoons that actually came to the Philippines. We have to actually disrupt our classes as well and do asynchronous activities. Similar to what was shared during the lecture, we do have what do you call this? Course packs. So they have study guide even if they are not with us.
Great, thank you, Maria. How about some possible solutions that you have tried or that you would like to try based on the conversations you heard today? And I would say feel free to share in the chat as well, if you would like. There's lots of great things in the Google Doc, but feel free to type in the chat. Maria, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so actually I'm teaching at the Faculty of Medicine and Surgery, and I was asked during the breakout sessions as well. So I told them that we did have telehealth, telemedicine. So the consultants will be having their patients interviewed by our fourth-year medical students who are into the clinics supposed to be. So instead of going to live patients, we have telemedicine online. And then for return demo of skills, we ask them to do the skills on their relatives at home. So those are some of the things that we do.
Great, thank you
I
so
guess it's a little difficult for the dentistry. Some of the members in the breakout rooms are dental students. So maybe they did the physical exam also online. Because I cannot read from the chat box. All our answers are in the chat box. So I'm actually just reporting from memory.
That's
Sorry.
great. No, that's great. We also have in the chat box that Marcy types open channels of communication, including email and Viber. It's not something I'm familiar with, and text for urgent matters. We've also been finding that some of our faculty have been setting up Slack channels with their students for quick conversation. Great. I'd love to hear from another group, some solutions that you came up with or talked about. Maybe I can go over. Go ahead.
Maybe I've been jumping from room to room, so that's why I would put in on the chat. Sometimes I bunch them together, but I think from the different rooms that I've been in, the guide questions number 2 and number 3 were very much related. So sometimes the solutions that they gave out were actually suggestions already on how to improve that. So I've included that in the Google Doc. So some of the solutions and suggestions, sorry for jumping to number 3, were to limit the time of synchronous sessions or lessen synchronous sessions to increase access to remote learning, because especially I think it so happened that most of the participants in are of course from the Philippines. So we have that common the common denominator of the slow internet connection. So and it's really a problem for the students. So and then they also suggested some had LMS available, but it is not, aside from not student friendly, it's not faculty friendly, because we need some more training to set that up and to navigate those LMS, and then shift to different messaging apps that would require lower bandwidth. So the students have lesser expenses, as our colleagues earlier were saying, because they're using mobile data, because the fixed broadband connections may not be available. Thank you.
Michael, I think what you are saying and what I'm hearing in the other conversations too reminds me of the information from the National Institute on Scientific Teaching, with all of those different conceptions that faculty had about inclusive teaching and equitable teaching.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a right answer or a wrong answer.
Yes.
Many
We
answers depending
yeah,
on
we don't know yet. We everybody was surprised with what's happened for the past few months. Everybody's learning as we go along, so it's continually evolving.
Mhm. Absolutely. I think we have time for probably one or two more comments. Are there any really interesting things from your group conversation that you'd like to share?
That's it.
Lalit, I think I heard some of your words. Try again if you could, please.
from that.
Oh, I'm hearing some of your words.
Let me just type it.
Okay, okay. Let me ask another question to you, which is, how do you balance, and this is for everyone in the group, this is coming in the chat, how do you balance compassion with lessening student load with still ensuring that they're learning? Which I think is a really interesting question. How do we make sure that we're conscious and empathetic of where our students are, but make sure that they still meet the standards? What ideas do you have? I mean, do we pass all of our students? Do we reduce the number of assignments? What have people done to show compassion but keep those same standards?
I've extended the deadline on assignments. So normally if they had a week or something, I would give them 2 weeks, for example, to be able to complete those.
I think the other thing that was in that paper that I read was that they reduced the content. So they realized that they could not go, if it's a 15-week semester, they said, well, instead of doing 15 content areas, we're going to do 12. And we're going to make sure that students really learn those deeply. I have a colleague who was doing this anyway. She's a vertebrate paleontologist. And she said there are whole classes of organisms that students never learn about. But the ones they do learn about, they learn really deeply. And so they can then apply what they learn in new contexts. Now, that doesn't work so well if you're in a nursing program or a medical program that has certain criteria that you need to meet each semester. But I think that it's worth thinking about. I like the extending deadlines. Are there other ideas?
In our college in Sayat UP Los Baños, we have decided to do some bridging programs for students still from second semester until this first semester. So most of our students who were not able to finish, because as Michael mentioned in his lecture, we have to stop our classes on April 30, 2020. So the second semester of that academic year, we only have a small percentage of the time allotted for the students. So we are doing a bridging program. We're open. The faculty is open to for student consultation until this sem and until next year. So same thing with this semester. So we have a a short period for the learning. So we're again open to a bridging program. So students can continue to consult us with us, and we have prepared some lessons for them until next year.
That's great. That's great. And so some of that, what I'm hearing is some of those are things that we can do individually in our classes, but some of them are much bigger picture. And I think, Michael, you touched on that really well, is that the whole university system made big picture structural changes. So I think that part of our responsibility can be to continue to communicate with our department heads and administrators about the challenges that our students are seeing and where we see we're missing equity. Gina, I'm going to read Gina's comment, and then I think our time is up. Gina says, at the beginning of the crisis, a friend said to concentrate on the learning outcomes. Yep, great. As long as the student demonstrates mastery of each learning outcome, it's okay not to cover everything in the syllabus. It also helps the students adjust to assessments that they need to change because of the need to go online, which is great. There's a lot of other. We talked several weeks ago at one of these sessions about different types of grading and how you change your grading or how you change your assessments. Lalit says, one suggestion from their group was that some of the faculty members also need to be supported as well, so that it's easy for them to provide the necessary content in student-friendly ways for the students to enjoy the content while remotely. That's great. So when we're talking about equity, we're not just looking about equity with our students, but equity with faculty as well. One of the conversations I was in was about, are we working at home with all of the other distractions of working at home, or do people have an opportunity to go to campus so that they have a quiet place to record their lectures and teach their classes? I think that we've heard a lot of things about what you want to try in the upcoming semester. So I think what I'll do now is thank my co-host, Michael, for joining me today. And then I want to preview that Mona Monfared, who was on here earlier, but I don't see her now, from the University of Davis, and then Fun Man from National University of Singapore are going to talk about assessment and how they use assessment. And both of them teach large classes in the between 200 and 500 range, and sometimes larger. So they're going to share about how they make sure, even in an online environment, that assessments are equitable and that they're meeting the learning outcomes and that they're paying attention to whether students are being academically honest. Thank you so much for your kind participation today. We really enjoy doing these each month and having an opportunity to hear from our colleagues around the globe.
Thank you so much to both of you also for organizing, and to everyone for participating. And I hope you have a wonderful holiday, that you stay safe and healthy, and that you join us for the final session, which is January 21st, 22nd, I think it was.
Those are the right dates, yes.
So thank you. Great to see you all.
Great, thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
You too.
Hi, Ellie.
Goodbye, Christina.
Bye, Kate.
Bye, Christina.
Hi,
Bye.
Melissa. Auf
Good to
Wiedersehen.
see you again, Melissa.
Auf Wiedersehen, Christina.
Even if Google doesn't understand it.
Yes. I don't know how to get out of here on the phone. God.
Oh, hang up.
Yes, somehow. Bye.
Bye. Okay, I'm gonna hang up too.
Ellie, sorry I missed your question about the time.
That's okay. That's okay. I realized I couldn't see when I went into my share screen, and my phone is somewhere else in the house. So.
Yes, of course. All right. Take care.
Yeah, Michael, stay safe. I hope cleanup continues to go well.
All right. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you,
Mike-
Annie.
Yeah, was it okay that I moved you sometimes and other times I kind of left you to sit?
Yeah, eventually I would come back on the same room.
Okay.
Just so the conversation would start. Sometimes the rooms will not have enough participants, so I would start it. Then when I would see some people coming in, then when you put me back there, there's a conversation going on. So
Okay.
I gravitated to one room afterwards.
Yeah,
Thank you for
at
that.
some point I stopped moving you all like when it seemed like things were going well. So
Yeah.
I moved people around a little bit, and then they were asking me questions here, and there were lots of people here. So I was sometimes I couldn't like keep moving
Yeah.
people. So I hope it was okay.
It was
So
great.
yeah,
Okay.
that is a legitimate problem with remote learning. You need really somebody to help you out managing, even for a Zoom call, for a Zoom meeting, you need somebody else to manage the chat, to manage the participants. So it's really a lot of work.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, good
I was
job.
happy to be
Thank you.
able to,
Okay.
yeah, I was happy to be able to help. Okay, take care.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Ellie.
Bye-bye.
I'm gonna end the meeting because I think folks are done.
Yep.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.